So, hi everyone, my name is Shihab Khan, and I work as I head the operations division at Kalam Youth Collective, and we are very happy to have our esteemed speaker here, Ms. Simi. And Kalam is essentially the requirements of the community are just too big, and we are all trying to work within our circles of influence. So, Kalam is one of those projects that we have also initiated, particularly for the Muslim youth, trying to help address whatever our spiritual, emotional, and professional requirements are. So, thank you very much, MWSC, for doing all the heavy lifting for this event. So, Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair. Muslim Women's Study Circle, MWSC, as you know, is an organization run by women, Muslim women, completely on the basis of volunteering, and it has been operating for around 5 years now. And every week, we try to bring about a Muslim woman who is there out in the field or is academically somewhere placed, and we ask her to provide her area of expertise, share her knowledge, not just giving a platform to women, but also like benefiting from the information that she has to provide and the experiences that they have. So we have been running for quite long. And Alhamdulillah, at one point of time, we thought that we'll run out of Muslim women, Indian Muslim women who would come to speak. But every time we find someone even more distinguished. And right, for example, right now we have Simi Salim, and she has her PhD from IIT Madras. Currently, she is working as a research assistant at ICSSR and Aligarh Muslim University. And she has contributed significantly to the field of motherhood through her publications and decoloniality. So Jazakallah khair, Simi, for joining in. Uh, please start with I know my introduction is not sufficient. Please start with a brief introduction about you and your life.
Okay, thank you so much, Sanya, for that very beautiful, cute introduction. So, my name is Simike Salim, and I graduated from IIT Madras in the month of May. And my PhD was on Muslim domestic narratives in the context of 20th century Malabar. So, basically, I was working in the discipline of feminist geography. Affect studies, where we would look into how women navigate through their very personal emotions within the home. That was one of my predominant area of interest. And currently, I am placed as an ICSSR research fellow with the Department of English, Aligarh Muslim University, where we are translating a couple of vernacular text in Arabic Malayalam into English. So that is what I'm currently doing. And we have a couple of books coming up. So I am co-editing a volume on motherhood studies as well as one on Muslim women's digital life writings, which is supposed to be published by the Manchester University Press. So I have a daughter, her name is Khadija Mariam, and me, along with my husband, Dr. Muhammad Fawaz. So we are actually working towards an edtech platform exclusively meant for PhD research scholars in humanities and social sciences, where we are planning to offer academic and professional mentoring to those who would like to pursue a career in humanities and social sciences, not only in academia, but also in the broader MNCs or within the industry itself. So hopefully we would launch our firm, a Doctor Mentor, in the month of October, inshallah. That's it. Thank you.
Brilliant. That sounds brilliant. So people generally understand what it means to be a doctor or an engineer or a lawyer. How would you explain? And my mother also has a hard time understanding when I say I'm a research fellow or something. Well, how would you explain being a researcher in social sciences to a general audience?
Okay. So maybe I'll put it like this: like if diagnosing a problem and finding a solution is usually what engineers or doctors do. For instance, if we visit a doctor, she or he might help us through our illness and maybe possibly prescribe a medicine. So, if that is the mode of operandi for the engineer or the doctor, I would say we, the researchers in humanities and social sciences, are largely social engineers, maybe to use that word. We engineer through social problems. We look into social inequity, hierarchy, or maybe issues of power structures, and which are very much embedded in the society, and we might think through the solutions. Um, and the solutions might be in the field of academia, suppose it, for instance, through knowledge production, which happens through the margin, or we may partake in policy making or work with the state or other bodies, or maybe we would work within the university spaces or colleges where we would train future scholars. So that is why I used the term social engineering is what people in HSS do.
That's a beautiful explanation. And why do you think it's important for Muslims, specifically Muslims, to engage in social science research in India or otherwise, especially since it hasn't traditionally been a focus in the community? Whenever we hear about jobs or when we hear about some profession being spoken about, this is not really a center of focus. So do you think, and why do you think it's important?
My answer is connected to your previous question because, like any other professional field, there is definitely a systemic exclusion of Muslims in the discipline of humanities and social sciences. Primarily, there is a visible absence of Muslim professors and students in the humanities and social sciences departments across the country. I think Sania also might be aware of it because she is enrolled in the IITB Monash program. So, when you take the number of Muslim students who are enrolled in these programs, or when you look into the number of professors who are actually teaching us, the gap is starkly visible. And this could be either because that the reservation policies are not properly maintained while recruiting professors and students, or it might be also possible that we as students from the Muslim community are stuck in some kind of anxieties, which is very much valid in the current scenario, on the kind of discrimination that we might possibly face in these campuses, and which can prevent us from applying to these places. So, in the HSS department at IIT Madras, the intake of doctoral students have been extremely low, and in the year between 2018 and 2024, there has been less than 8 recruits of PhD scholars into the department. So there is also an exclusion of Muslims from the syllabus. For instance, we rarely find Muslim academicians whom we can actually look up in terms of finding a methodology, or who can provide us sufficient assistance in deriving some kind of methodology. So in my case, I was working on the South Asian Muslim domestic space, but I was unable to find relevant works which could fit into our own marginal Muslim context, or South Asian works which are empathetic to local cultures, or the way Muslim, not only Muslim women, but maybe Dalit women, or the way Christian women understand spaces. So I think it is very important that both women and men in the community come into these places, predominantly because we can play a second role in the production of archives, in the production of academic publications, um, within the publishing industry, where we kind of seriously engage with the so-called mainstream.
Yeah, absolutely. And even when it comes to, let's say, social policy, who are the people who are making these social policies in India? And there aren't any Muslims in it.
Yeah.
So it just like, someone like sometimes when we come across something which has been developed for Muslims, we see it as absolutely like unaware of the context or the specific context of how Muslims are living and staying. They didn't have any idea. And a researcher or an academic who is from within the community would contribute so much more. I absolutely agree. So given that we rarely come across, these days I'm seeing a lot of Muslim women in research, but what led you to start your journey? Like, what did you do your undergrad in, and how did you end up becoming a doctor?
Okay, so I did my graduation from Union Christian College, which is affiliated to Mahatma Gandhi University in Central Kerala. And I did my post graduation from the Department of English, Jamia Millia Islamia. So, and then I cleared my GRF during the second semester of my master's program, and the entry into IIT was relatively easy because I had my GRF. And um, and if you ask me what kind of inspired me, because I was always keen on acquiring some kind of financial and cultural capital, because the place where I come from, because I basically belong to the Central Kerala seafaring community, because my ancestors were seafarers, like they were fishermen. And my father was so keen on teaching us English, or sending us to a private school, because he believed that getting some kind of proficiency in English was so important to climb the social ladder. And I think that was one thing which my father taught me, that is gaining as much as capital as possible, whether it be the cultural capital or whether it is the financial capital. And acquiring this proficiency in English language was that one very revolutionary step. And secondly, because during my graduation and post graduation days, while I was reading works on feminist studies or women's studies, the kind of knowledge we were acquainted to were largely from liberal scholars, were largely from upper caste Savarna writings, which was very much distanced from our own everyday realities.
Yeah.
So while I was in Jamia, it was Jamia played a predominant role in shaping my reading, for instance, because I came across the writings of Afro American women, which resonated a lot to our own Muslim backgrounds. Even though we had the works of Saba Mahmood or Laila Ahmad or Laila Bulugud or Afro American writers like Bell Hooks or Audre Lorde, there are very few writers or Muslim women scholars from South Asian, very Indian context whom we could actually look up to. So my attempt was, or my research was in a way inspired by all these kind of vacuum which existed in academia, which, as you said before, was usually determined by people who considered as specimens for a long time, who were very much indifferent to our own very nuanced, very religious in a way, intense communities. So I think me and scholars like me, a lot of women are working on similar disciplines. A lot of women are working towards building archives of knowledge in terms of Muslim women, or in terms of decolonial scholarships surrounding Muslim or Dalit women. So I think all of these were inspiration. Thank you.
So we have a Muslim Women's Study Circle book club, and we read books specifically to Muslim women. And like there are hardly a handful of few authors whom we could actually relate to, and the rest of them, they are either feeling sorry for the Muslim women or they're telling them how to live a truly liberal life. So I can truly understand when you say the paucity of Muslim voices about our lives, and you know how religiosity is frowned upon. Like it's not really a thing which someone educated might choose to pursue. So yeah, this has been a struggle, and this is a constant struggle for us Muslim women. And maybe scholars, more Muslim women scholars, can make a dent in this literature. So have you ever faced like some kind of difficulty in reconciling feminist literature and creating a space for practicing Muslim women like you within that literature?
Definitely, yes. Especially, I was from literary studies. I did my post graduation in literature at Jamia. So, My first year of doctoral research was, trying to find out some kind of methodology where we can incorporate spirituality as a
Yeah.
method or methodology. We rarely talk about religiosity or spirituality as a method in literary studies. We have maybe say we have memory studies, we have gender studies, we have eco studies or urban studies or disciplines such as that, but we rarely talk about spirituality in itself as a method to read literary text. So I came across this scholar called Rosie Braidotti. So Rosie Braidotti is basically a post-secular feminist, and she talks about this idea called residual spirituality in literary theory. She says that every kind of scholarship is embedded in some kind of spirituality, and then she traces this back to 17th century Christian nuns, for instance, the writings of Christian nuns, the Afro-American writings of women, which is so much embedded in spirituality. And she says that even the idea of secular is very much rooted in spirituality. For instance, we have the statues of Mahatma Gandhi, who which we kind of adore and pay homage to. And she says that is a kind of spirituality where you are honoring certain persons. See for the image of Ronaldo, for instance, or the image of Madonna, where you look up to that person with so much of veneration. And Braidotti says that there is spirituality everywhere. So I think that was one takeaway for me during my first year of research in this discipline, because ultimately, as practicing women, there was this, you might be aware of this research gap, for instance, where you are reading or where we are reading liberal scholarship, which is very much rooted in atheistic Marxist tradition, and there are also possibilities that we might get into those scholarship too much. So the post-secular genealogy, or what you call as the residual spirituality in critical theory, was so much important, or that is where my entire research is anchored upon.
Okay, so now that we are on the topic of your research, and for those of us with audience in our audience, when we are doing PhD, it takes at least a year and a half to create a research question. So what exactly do we need to find out, and how would we do that, the methods of it? So Simi, what was your journey on reaching your research question? What was the main primary research question? How did you arrive at that? And please explain to us in a simple language.
Oh, sure, Sanya. I think you could start with the slideshow, but let me tell you, the first year was extremely difficult for me because I was working with two professors who were very much well versed in their area, because both of them were working on feminist geography and women's archives, but completely new to the discipline of Muslim women's studies. So the first part of it was to convince my DC that I was doing something um, literary. Okay, so to convince people that we are doing literature, to convince people that we are actually contributing to literary studies rather than being pedantic, or so to say. So it was a very difficult process because, as I told you before, I was struggling in terms of methodology. To be very candid, I was struggling in terms of methodology. So when I consulted with my professor, he in fact told me to work on the spaces where I come from. So, um, being a Muslim womanist, or so to say, I come from a very middle class Muslim background where I see grandmothers reciting Quran or Hadith or prophetic verses. I come from there. So you might be aware of the standpoint theory in feminist studies, where you actually theorize where you come from. So I was fascinated by the idea of spaces because my grandmother or my great grandmother were women who never had opportunity to go out of their house. my grandmother was married at the age of 13, and she rarely has, um, she rarely had the opportunity. I don't know if the word opportunity fits in. She never went out, almost like. Uh, so I thought, why not work on domestic places or domestic spaces which are inhabited by all these Muslim women, where they engage in some kind of meaning making, where they connect with a lot of object, where they connect with a lot of people within the house. And when I came back to literature in itself, we rarely find literary works which talk about domestic as such, because the usual narrative surrounding domesticity or domestic space is that, or whichever domestic may be, not only the Muslim context, the usual liberal feminist narrative is that the domestic is usually a site of oppression, is a site of patriarchy, is a site of control, in opposition to a very emancipated or a very sanitized public space which is devoid of violence. So, right from the 18th century Muslim women writing in India, for instance, if we take the work of Iqbal and Nisa Hussain, who was writing from Hyderabad during the early 20th century, she has written a couple of fantastic works in English, one of the early Muslim writers from India. And beginning with her work, we see these kind of binary between the public and the private work, because one among Hussein's work is Parda and the Polygamy, like you might have heard about the novel. This whole narrative of men, or the narrative centered on religion. So my research was primarily centered on domestic objects, where I look into the kind of emotional connect women develop with domestic objects such as furnitures, electric fans, or bedroom spaces, or the kind of friendship networks women forge within the domestic space. So my research looked into Malabari women singers who sang at Muslim homes in Malabar during the 20th century, and their relationship or connections with Muslim homes. In the second part of my research, I looked into contemporary Malayalam fiction by Muslim women, and looked into what constituted the home, or what constituted the Muslim house in the first place. And my research questions primarily revolved around the Muslim house, moving away from all these oppressed or religion male axis. I looked into the objects which constituted the home. So I looked into a broad spectrum of oral, literary, and performative narratives, and I looked, as I told you before, furniture was one significant focal point of my research. For instance, um, there was this women singer whose name was Aisha Kuti, who hailed from southern Kerala, and she was called Kaikutti Patigarati. She is a singer, she's a female singer who hailed from the barber community. And in my oral interview with her, she was talking to me about the manjira. Manjira is basically the small, it's a small musical instrument which we use for getting that rhythm while we are reciting poetry or while we are praying. It's very similar to the bead. So Aisha Kuti was talking to me about the emotional connect she had with the manjira. So, despite coming from a very marginalized Barber community, she talked about Manjira for hours. It was an object which she inherited from her great grandfather, who was also a singer. So, I looked into the way she forged an emotional attachment with the Manjira. And yet another person was P.K. Kuldu from Kasargod district of Kerala. So Kuldu was talking about this Sabina song. Sabina song is basically the Arabic Malayalam vernacular texts which are owned by Mapla women. So she talked about how intimately she is connected to this text, that she would not hand any copy of this text to her, it is so much intensely connected to her that she would not even allow me to touch the same. So this kind of attachments with objects, this kind of attachment with spaces, And architecture of the house was yet another important vantage point in my research. I looked into kitchen spaces, I looked into dining table, the space of the dining, I looked into courtyard space, the garden space. For instance, in early 20th century Kerala, there was this dancing book stalls where men and women would carry baskets containing books, and they would reach the kitchen side of the house, or they would come to the back side of the house, and they would sell copies of Arabic Malayalam pamphlets to women who were cooking in the kitchen. So kitchen was so important in transferring books. Kitchen played a predominant role in knowledge production. Kitchen was one important site where women would sing, where women would read together, women would cluster together and dance. Um, so it was an important site of, in our modern sense of the term, literary exchange. But we rarely talk about kitchen in academia as a very important space. And yet another object was an almirah, which was owned by singer Aisha Kuti. It came to her through a matrilineal exchange, because it actually belonged to her grandmother. And her granddaughter is fascinated with this almirah, because then and in one of the oral interviews, Aisha Kuti talked to me about how they actually made the almirah from the furniture town of Kalai in central Kerala. And she talked to me about how her father commissioned this particular carpenter to build the almirah for her, took efforts to transport the almirah back into the house in Malabar, and how she would spend time polishing the almirah, how she would spend time, adoring the almirah altogether. So these kind of connections, and how women regard objects so much as vested with emotions. Um, the kind of emotional access to objects that you give to objects which are in your home space. So all of these were included in my research.
So the way you speak about it, no, it makes me think of so many, like so many events. Like I'll start with the first one. Let's say I can think of my grandmother, my dadi, talking so much passionately about few objects in the house, and like she would keep it safely. She would up in there, and she had a relation with them. And I would it the way you spoke of it, it felt like a literary cinema being spanned out. You'd want to a woman looking at these things at the end of her life, like how she has spent so much of time with those objects, and yet we never come across these narratives. The only narrative I came of about the kitchen growing up was that it being a site of oppression. But that's true. I've seen my mother have such a lovely time in the kitchen where she's chatting and she's humming something and she's doing something. So now the title of the Onsong Senses and Emotions, narrating the Muslim domestic in South Asia, once I read the title, I didn't understand much. But now that you speak of it, that what were you actually researching? It's just sounds so fascinating, because at some point of time we have to go beyond seeing things solely as objects of oppression or objects of liberation, but something which is being lived in the moment, and how women have that relation, which is so wonderful. But one question which I have in my mind is that why did you choose a specific? I have never come across a Muslim women community who sing. That itself is very interesting. So how did you decide on narrowing down on those specific Muslim women within Malabar?
Okay, Sanya, before moving to your question, let me tell this, because since I am working on domestic space and house and homes and trying to find out some kind of meaning in what women do, I think it is so important that my research or my talk does not end up in romanticizing injustices women might face inside homes. So whether be in academia or outside, it is so important that our readings or our academic engagements end up in romanticizing any kind of oppressions or any kind of patriarchy. But to think through to say that a different kind of narrative exists altogether was my primary agenda.
Mhm.
So initially, I was working in Chennai, so I was staying over there in Chennai. I came across this tradition of Kaikutti Pattikarathigal in Tamil Nadu, in Kanyakumari. So there was this tradition of Muslim women singers who would go and sing for wages. So these are not upper caste Muslim women. We are talking about Muslim women who hail from very difficult, very difficult backgrounds in terms of their caste and class. So, the tradition of women singers were very much popular in Malabar until the end of 20th century, and they were called as Kai Kotti Pattikarathigal. Or Kai Kotta means, you are clapping your hands together in rhythm. So that is Kai Kotta. And Pattikarathigal means Patta is song. So Pattikarathigal is women singers. So, and there would be a head singer who would be called as the Mupatti. And I was working with Kaigoti Pattikarathigal in three districts of northern Kerala, specifically in Calicut, Kasargod, and Thrissur, predominantly Muslim populated belt of these three districts. That's what I was doing. And we when we talk about Muslim women writing, we usually start with the literary text. There is always a kind of privileging of the literary, because we usually start from 20th century writing, or there is always a privileging given to text as such. But I was interested in what about women who were illiterate, or what about women who were not able to read and write standard Malayalam, or standard, in your context it could be standard Hindi for that uh, means. So what about those women who are unable to write Malayalam or write English? So all of these women singers whom I interviewed were illiterate in the modern sense of the term, because they never knew to write Malayalam, or they never ventured enough to learn the language. And this was one gap which I found in the area, to chronicle the life histories of women who are systemically excluded from the modern sense of the literary, or in the modern sense of progressiveness, or there is always a tendency to equate modernity with the literary. So does that mean the people who were very much involved or very much invested in their own life worlds, does that mean that they are not academic enough, or did they not have their own kind of questions, were they not critical enough? So um, there was this Kaikutti Pattukarati Rukaiya. She hails from Nyamanengada in Thrissur district. So she was actually thrown out of her house because she took up this singing as a career during the 1940s. So Rukaiya was a part of the communist movement, and she was ostracized. She was sent out of the house because she went for singing in other Muslim homes. So usually these singing competitions would happen after the Maghrib prayers. Like it would start at 6:30 in the evening and would go until Fajr in the early morning the next day. So it was usually 6 to 7 hours of performance, and in between the singer would sleep and then wake up, and the singing would continue after Fajr. So, which would technically mean that the singer would be staying in the house in which she is invited to perform, or who pays for her. So, this caused a lot of anxiety within the community. The sexual anxiety, for instance, and Rukaiya was very much articulated, because the kind of songs she sung was very much unlike the standard piety which we always subscribe to. She talked about the sexual life between Prophet Muhammad and his wives. So that kind of poetic language, where you kind of tweak the morality a little bit, where you kind of twist sexuality a bit. So all of these are what I looked into. And the thing is that we don't see these kind of singers anymore. So all of them, when I interviewed, they were 85 to 90 years old. A couple of them passed away during COVID, because, and so we never see these kind of singers. Hi. Salam. So this is your daughter, right?
Yes, yes. Please continue. She has been
So
crying.
happy to with you. Okay, so this is what I did in my research. Yes.
Simi, this is absolutely not to disregard the existing research that exists on, let's say, the kitchen as being a state of being, a space of oppression, things like that. But just that the beauty of multiple narrations and multiple realities of meaning making, like you said, absolutely, absolutely. So I would like to put on the slides, and let's to our audience, let's all go further deep into what Simi has been researching, and she'll be explaining in depth her research question, the method, and some of the findings that she has had. Is that okay, Simi?
Yeah, sure. You can start with the slideshow. Thank
Oh,
you, Sai. So, okay. So this is actually okay. So this is actually an excerpt from the interview with I had with singer Aishu Kuti from Thrissur district. So she said to me that we start practicing songs from the Sabina 3 days before the wedding. I am the lead singer and I teach them, the other women in the troupe, the tala or the rhythm of clapping. I used to play with words and the women folk laughed at my efficiency. They bring three colors of perfumes from Mangalore, the white, green, and red colored bottles, and the bride is bathed in that. We stand at the doorstep of the bathroom and sing while she is being bathed and perfumed. With all the smell and lighting and the vetila, it was a hal, which is translated as ecstasy, and would continue till midnight. Can we move to the next slide? Okay, so as I told before, my research examines a lot of oral, literary, and performative narrative by women, which is centered on the idea of domestic space. And it aimed to offer a refreshingly productive vocabulary to read the domestic spaces in general and Malayali Muslim domestic in particular. It looked into the role of objects, spaces, actor network. So when I say actor network, it means that the kind of emotional connect human beings develop with fellow human beings, but also with non-living objects. Effective relations and the role of song text in the production of home. So I used the word affect instead of emotion is because there is a very narrow gap between these two words. Like emotion is about, if I say I am crying, that is an emotion. But if I say that my heart is beating or my there is goosebumps on my body, the physical manifestation of emotion is basically affect. So I was basically looking into the way women clapped, the way women laughed, the way women cried, because uh, the way women sang elegy was one of my central arguments in my core chapter. So the way women cried was a central point. So and hence effect comes here. In its ethnographic study, the thesis examined the production and performance of domestic vernacular songs and their role in the creation of domestic. And apart from that, can you move the slides? uh, Women singers who performed at the Muslim households in Kerala during the 1940 to the 2000 was my focal point. And textual sources from Malabar refer to these singers as Patukaratigal and Kalikaratigal. The singer who led the performance was referred to as the Mupatti or Karnoti. And I looked into, as I told before, the way Muslim women appropriated spaces such as windows, gardens, and porches, and how they developed emotional connections and networks of solidarity. Moving on to the next slide. The primary objective of my research was to foreground the domestic as a sensory space, or what you call as a feeling space, which is inscribed by artifacts, which are objects, affect, and emotions, to understand the poetics of song production, socio-materiality, spirituality, and affect inscribed in vernacular domestic songs, to read the life narratives of women singers, and to locate these women actors within the wider web of authority, materiality, and discourses on domesticity in 20th century South India, to engage in a close reading of contemporary Malayalam writing and examine how the positive valence attributed to home space emerged from embodied homemaking practices of female characters. Moving on to the research gap, scholarly accounts on Muslim women's domestic transactions have largely remained anthropological, or ethnographic accounts on women's agentic engagements, accounts of women exercising authority in the public. That word authority and the public are so important. And there were narratives on travels and pilgrimages. Apart from that, academic vocabulary surrounding the domestic were often caught up in public private binary, overlooking historical and cultural specificities and the way local actors understand and experience spaces. Moving on, the Muslim domestic in scholarly literary text have been confused with the narratives of an oppressed Muslim women in domestic space and with narratives that suggest a linear movement of characters from an oppressed space towards an emancipatory public. My research also attempted to address the lack of personal life narratives or autobiographical accounts by women actors within Muslim performative traditions. Moving on to my research methodology, I primarily looked into feminist geography and spatial studies. So I began with Marxist geography, but again, there was this problem with public private binary, or this idea of an isolated women at home. And later I moved on to the works of within feminist geography. I was fascinated by the works of Lily Kong or uh, Bell Hooks' works on home space. And I looked into the discipline of affect studies, atmospheres and think theory, and homemaking practices. The idea of homemaking practices was very important because in her work, Evocative Objects, Sarah Ahmed talks about how exactly um, um, there is a liberatory potential that is vested in domestic objects. For instance, there is the feminist philosopher who is named as Arita Herc. She looked into the possibility of emancipation, which is embedded in housework. But this is not to romanticize housework as such, or it is not to romanticize homekeeping as such. But despite that, she talks about how exactly domestic objects are vested with so much of what to say, in a way, liberatory potentials, or in a way, domestic objects are vested with so much of affective energy. Then I looked into thing theory. I specifically looked upon the works of Bill Brown, Arjuna Padre, his idea of social life of things, and Shirley Turkle. I looked into the works of Sarah Pink, where she talks about how inhabitants develop a kind of affective tie with the house. And I looked into the idea of smell, sound, and vision, and the possibilities of, or what to say, the liberatory possibilities of housework and home creativity. Um, so all of these were my primary research areas, and I looked upon the architectural patterns and territorial demarcations of the interior, how exactly house has the potency to weave in gendered subjectivity, moral codes, customs, and behavioral patterns. I looked into territorial spaces such as the courtyard as emblematic of the everyday map of patriarchy. While reading contemporary narratives by Malayali Muslim women, I looked upon spaces such as doors and windows, how they function as sites of alteration and appropriation, and how porch functions as a threshold. So, and then that was what I did in terms of my method. So basically, it was a kind of intersection of feminist geography with thing theory, and the study of senses, where um, I looked into the works of Margaret Pernow and how humans developed a kind of emotional connect with houses, or how they developed a kind of emotional connect with fellow women, for instance. And my research contributions, or the implications of my research, revealed on how narratives on the Muslim domestic have largely remained caught up in public private binarisms, centered solely on the patriarchy, religion, male axis. The research also pushed for a framing of an indigenous understanding of domestic space as coded by local actors, particularly the women. It emphasized the need for an interdisciplinary framework of feminist spatial studies, affect and emotion studies, human artifact complexes, and oral narratives to understand the complexities surrounding domestic space in South Asia. Moving to the conclusion of my research, um, can I have the next slide? Okay. It attempted to conceptualize an Arab Tamil domestic tradition. It's basically an Arabic Malayalam domestic tradition with Arab Tamil domestic songs. Women performers and audience might open up the possibility of locating yet another feeling community of South Asian women. There is definitely a scope for literary ethnography to explore the life narratives of women singers or performers in the age of media and locate the multiple ways through which these women navigate the public, private, and the virtual. Future research can also explore the complex ways through which Muslim women performers align their bodies and performative styles in the virtual space, overlooking the binaries of sacred profane and conventions of morality. The methodological insights which are employed in this research can be used to read similar domesticities across South Asia. So that's it. Thank you. That was a very short and brief presentation of what I did in my thesis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simi. In such a short time, you gave us a glimpse of what looks like, what a PhD looks like, and also specifically PhD in literature. Um, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. We say a PhD journey changes you. So how did this research change you, like when as your first day as a student, and then now, what changes do you see in yourself? How did it change you?
Okay. I think it was an intensely emotional journey because I write about emotions and I study emotions. But usually, there is always a tendency to marginalize emotions altogether. So it was a very it was a journey of self-reflection, so to say, a journey of self-transformation. Um, because I was working with women, and in due course of time, a lot of these women passed away during the time of COVID. Because, as I told you before, almost all of them were between 70 and 90 years of age, and I see women dying. And to see Muslim women dying, or fellow women dying, with the women with whom I spent so much of hours conversing, it was a very humbling experience, because I was thinking, where do all these knowledge go when they die? Where do all these? Because usually an interview would span up to 5 hours a day or 6 hours a day, and we would continue the next day. And all of these women, as I told you before, they were quite old, and there would be breaks in between. So the kind of data I got, and the kind of data, or the amount of data I was able to inculcate in, or I was able to incorporate in my research, was very less. Like, it's a very short 250 pages thesis. So it was very much humbling, because all of us are embedded in some kind of modernist understanding in terms of our life worlds, because it's very much grounded in modernity, or the Western European sense of being, or sense of meaning making. So for me, it was like traveling backwards. So when we usually say in academia, gaining a PhD or then going for a postdoctoral fellowship, there is a kind of acceleration, or it's a kind of linear movement. It's more like the Western teleology of progress. You go from your LKG to your PDF, and in due course of time, you move away from the community which brought you up. Move away from the clusters of women who might have played an important role in your life. So for me, it was a decelerating journey in that sense of the term, or in that sense of Western usage of the term, because I was able to come back to my roots. I was able to understand more about women, or the way women navigate through different kinds of emotions. So when I told you before, like, um, you know, the idea of death was so humbling, or was so fascinating, because one day you see women passing away, and all those Sabina texts which they use for singing, and all of their equipments which they told me which were so dear to them. So I went for their funeral ceremonies in Kasaragod and in Trishur. I used to travel across Kerala for attending funeral functions. So to see their room with all those objects which they so happily talked about in the interview sessions. So, as I told you before, it was a very humbling journey. It was a very emotional journey. And it is a highly exhaustive journey, as you might know. It's a very exhaustive journey, but equally fulfilling. It's almost like giving birth to a child.
Yeah.
So, for me, it went literal because I gave birth to Khadija during the process. So, it was literal and
You had two babies.
metaphorical birthing. Yes, I had two babies. So, it was a literal and metaphorical birthing.
Yeah, absolutely. Just hearing you gives us a glimpse of the depth of your research. Like, there's so much more appreciation um, for the work that you have done. So, talking about your journey, what were the challenges that you faced? Especially, we have heard so much about IIT Madras and it being so notorious. I don't know how much of it is true, and what specific challenges did you face in your PhD journey?
I think it's very important that we should be aware of the systemic exclusion that is my internet stable?
So, it's slightly unstable. Like, um,
Can you
your
hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah. If you want, you can turn off your
Okay,
video.
fine. So, yeah, I think that would be fine.
I'll also turn off mine.
So, I think, the thing is that all of us are very well aware of the systemic exclusion, because we rarely see Muslim actually teaches us. And it was partly isolating for me because I had a very few Muslim friends inside the campus. But apart from that, there was no any kind of visible discrimination as such. But however, the academic demands of IIT was very rigorous because we had very extensive methodology classes during our first 2 semesters, and we had a very intensive term purpose. And in IIT Madras, for defending our PhD thesis, we are supposed to have two Scopus publications, which is apart from the mandatory international and national conferences. So all these things, apart from that kind of very isolating climate of the campus, um, meeting up with the academic demands was in fact very much difficult. And in between, we had COVID, and I had my pregnancy. But I think the campus also came with a lot of advantages, because IIT definitely value, because we are working with the specialist in the area. For instance, I was working with Dr. Abhishek Paruvi, who was working on memory studies and spatial studies, along with Dr. Srilata, who was working on women's archives. So her PhD was on self-respect movement and women's narratives in Periyar's anti-caste struggle, so which was very much resonating with my own work. So that kind of interdisciplinarity IIT offers was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And the kind of funding, the I think we have to talk about the funds a student in IIT Madras might receive, because this would come apart from the GRF which we get. they would cover your pregnancy. So in case we are conceiving in between our thesis or in between our PhD journey, they would fund your entire pregnancy, and they would fund for our international trips. They would, so it's like, for my pregnancy I got somewhere around 1.5 lakhs. They
Who
covered
funded?
my entire, no, IIT would cover your pregnancy bills. That's what they do. IIT would medically insure your parents. So my parents had a medical insurance all through my journey at IIT. So
Mhm.
I was specifically looking into the affirmative policies that we students or students from marginalized communities can have. So and you are a, IITB Monash fellow, so you are aware of the kind of interdisciplinary PhD programs which we all have. So I think this was a fantastic place for me because I was able to gain some kind of cultural capital and that brand value. But that doesn't mean that we are not aware of the kind of systemic violence perpetrated by all these campuses like IIT, where we, as I told before, we rarely see a Muslim faculty. In my department, it was, I think it was like one professor who hailed from the Muslim community, but he was from a very liberal background. So these kind of exclusion was definitely there, but the kind of affirmation or the kind of confidence the campus gave me was absolutely fulfilling. That's it.
Yeah, I missed out on many of these perks of being in IIT because I came here, and Alhamdulillah, it was good here as well. But these joint PhD programs, in many ways, you don't get the benefits that you get from a government funded. Um,
Oh,
yeah, so there are a lot of advantages, but a lot of disadvantages as well. They claim to give a higher amount, like they would say that we'd give you something which would always be more than JRF, but then they would only give it for 4 years, and no one in their own academy has finished it in 4 years. So their own average rate is finishing their PhD in 5 years. So essentially, you are like for 1 year, you are without funding. And IITs have always, like my friends, they have other ways, like you can get scholarship some amount during the, like when you when your thesis is submitted. After that, like there's different stages and you do get, so you miss out on all of that in these joint funded programs. So yeah, in some ways it's a sham, but in many ways it's good as well, because you get an opportunity to stay outside and see how things work. Yeah.
I think that is so important because I think as a community we should work towards attaining or sending our students to all these kinds of eminent institutes, or as you said, into the kind of collaborative programs that you are working on. I think we should have more affirmative policies which are oriented specifically at sending students abroad or to institutes of eminence.
Forgive me for asking this, but maybe it's not the most appropriate question right now. But were you there when Fatima died there by suicide?
Yes, yes, yes. I was there in the
Must have been
campus.
so like difficult that time.
It was extremely difficult because it was in 2018 and I was in the campus and she was in my department. And I know usually there is this, the portrayal of the Muslim students as troublemakers, because all of us were shattered because, it was almost like you can read and write for almost 6 months. Like we were stuck. And then CA NRC happened. And then there was anti-CR NRC protest all through the country. And the trouble with all these campuses is that, including while working with my own guides, is that after a point, nobody seems to be concerned or empathetic to our own problems. So I had my own, gladly, alhamdulillah, I had my own friends, Muslim friends, students from lower caste communities whom I could lay my, uh, you know, mental energies upon. So I think that was those kind of friendships were so important for me. But what happened to Fatima was completely unfortunate. But as far as I'm not someone to make a comment on it, but I really believe it's a part of the system which we all are in. It's really a part of the structural violence that as Muslim students we are supposed to face from all these kind of universities. And very sadly, she was a graduate student. She was in her BA program first year. where you are, you are actually prone to violences committed by your professors. But when you are in doctoral program, you are somehow insulated, because we have to communicate with our own professors. But sadly, she was a brilliant student. Like, I have to say that she was a brilliant student. She was very much brilliant in philosophy, Western philosophy. And I have heard her friends talking about how she would read the text in prior to the professor who was teaching her, and how she would ask questions. And the number of suicide rates in IIT Madras, like during the past 5 years, every semester I would wake up. Some day in the semester, there would be a mail in the official email talking about the suicide of one student or the other. So I was there in the campus for, I think, around 8 semesters. And 8 semesters, I think there was around an average of 5 to 6 student death in the campus, and all of the students was hailing from Muslim community or other lower caste backgrounds. So I think the mental health of our students who are enrolled in these campuses are so important. It's high time that we begin to speak about mental health as such.
PhD is such a lonely journey, and I think it's only the friends that you make on the way that helps you keep be sane. Yeah, I wish like the institution does so much more, because IITs also, all IITs have such similar suicide rates, and it is so unfortunate, and the institution has a lot to account for. Um, Especially the deeply hierarchical structures, the power structures in which students are not seen really as anything. uh Inshallah, one day. So what lessons would you like to share with people who are hearing you, especially Muslim women? What lessons would you, or what words would you like to end this with?
I don't know if this was a very candid, this was very candid talk, because
Meant to be that way.
yeah, it was a very personal. It was because I never got a space to share how exhausting and equally fulfilling it was. So I think as women, one thing I learned all through the way was the importance of resilience, because it is so important that we might have our kids, we might have a husband, our families to take care of, and then we would have the academia, which is definitely very liberal, which rarely takes into account the space of children, the space of home, or the value of home as such, or the importance of communities. So all through the journey, I have learned a lot of resilience and perseverance, or lessons on perseverance. So I think it's very important for Muslim women to aim for institutes of eminence, whether be it NITs or IITs or universities abroad, which can offer sufficient financial aid, and also sufficient aid for taking care of the children. Like in IIT, we had a childcare facility, which was like for 2 hours, I could drop my kid over there, and then I could focus on my work. So that helped a lot. So I think it's so important that women look into these kinds of opportunities in higher education, where you can couple your life with your academic pursuits. And I think networking is something that is so important in academia. This would mean academic networking, where you are connecting with fellow scholars, fellow academicians who are in your area. But apart from that, networking would also imply friendship networks, because it is a very lonely, isolating journey. Because at the end of the day, it would be you, your laptop, your PDFs to read, and the thesis waiting to be written. So, one thing that helped me a lot was I invested so much in my friendship. I invested so much in my family, because I got married during my PhD, during my first year of the PhD. I had a child in between the PhD. So, but that investment was worth it, because it's almost like investing in a stock market. You get the return back. So, so partly, so when you asked me why was IIT less isolating for me, it was because I had a family to fall back to. I had my husband, and later I had my kid to look back to.
Yeah.
So I think networking is so important for Muslim women, both academic, professional, and personal networking. And thirdly, I think it is so important to plan things ahead, usually, I think Sanya might know, we all carry a planner from the first day of our PhD, a very tiny notebook or a journal, maybe. So, systemic planning is so important. Like, there might be difficult days, there might be days when we might not feel like doing the thing which we are supposed to do. But planning for your family, planning for your partner, planning for your kid, planning for your reading schedule actually helps a lot. And I think that was one thing which I actually religiously did. I used to plan day by day, but at the end of the day, it's always in the hands of Allah. But it actually helped. Planning helped a lot. And I think we have to stay flexible all through the journey. It's not like the planning would work. No, it's not a linear journey. So I think we have to remain as flexible as possible. So all of these, and doing some kind of part-time jobs and working on your PhD skills can also be beneficial, because there are a lot of career options apart from academia. There are a lot of career options for English students or humanities or social science students within the industry. So it is so important to develop the set of PhD right, the set of right skills in PhD, which we can monetize at the end of the journey. I think that skill making is so important. That's it.
So one grand takeaway is that choose your support systems and choose them very wisely. Your partner, your marriage, nothing can stop you from going ahead, and nothing should stop you. Women often tend to think that these things would naturally come to an end once they get married, but there is no reason. There is no reason. If you have the right support system, they will support you through your uh, through your educational journey. Definitely. And one more question. You're talking about career options. What career options are available for students or researchers in social sciences? And how do you see yourself in that?
Okay, okay. So currently, I am an ICSSR fellow with the Department of English at Aligarh Muslim University. So it's a very decently funded project which I am working on now, and I have two books coming up. So apart from the normal linear trajectory of doing a PhD and then getting into tenure track universities or deemed universities, I think, or as I understand now, there are a lot of options in the industry. For instance, um, if you are having a doctorate in English studies, you can work with AI. You can work with programs like ChatGPT or Amazon, where they hire specialists in humanities and social sciences disciplines who can actually help the AI to develop contents. So Google was hiring language specialists. Google was hiring specialists in the area of social sciences, which can actually help ChatGPT to develop data or content, or to cross check content. So one of my friends is working with the ChatGPT on gender inclusivity. So as you are aware, the contents generated by ChatGPT often tend to be very much white, European, misogynistic in terms of races, very much at times. So a friend of mine is placed with ChatGPT, and she is having a very attractive salary also. So these kind of options where you don't place your PhD thesis in the museum. So I think that is so important. After done and dusted, so once your PhD is done and dusted, there is usually a tendency that the thesis would remain with the university. But as you said in the introduction, I think it's very important to incorporate your PhD back into the industry or back into the policy making discourses, so that it creates some kind of very transformative changes or affirmative changes in that way. So as I told you before, we were working on this startup which is called Dr Mentor. So we are launching a career ladder program. It's like CLP career ladder program for students who are enrolled in PhD programs in universities in India and abroad, so that all through their PhD they can work on a set of skills, and by the end of their PhD program, we hopefully aim to place them within academia as well as the industry. So it's something which we envision for, so that in our country there is definitely a saturation of PhD holders. Are you aware of it? The system cannot absorb the PhDs. Either you have to work as a guest lecturer for a very menial pay, or you would be overaged or so. So I think it's very important that we are able to have some kind of mechanism to absorb the scholars back, or to absorb the doctoral scholars back into the system. So this is what we are working on now.
Is there any website where others can look it up or any?
Yeah, actually, we would launch formally in the month of September or by the end of by early October. So
You can
we
send it
would
to
be
me. I'll
launching. And
send
I
it
think
to the group.
I would share it with you, like
Yeah, definitely.
the official website and Instagram IDs. Would be more than happy to
Definitely.
connect.
So we have the last 15 minutes left, and if there are any questions, please raise your hand. I can see one question. I'd like to repeat it. From the liberal feminist perspective, the domestic space is seen as an oppressive site for women. How do you challenge or appropriate this view in your research? Yeah. So Simi had mentioned that there can be multiple narratives. Simi, would you like to elaborate on that, or do you feel like you have already answered this question?
I think because my, as I told you before, it was no way to romanticize
Yeah.
oppression, but to talk
Mhm.
about alternative narratives or alternative histories as such.
Yeah. So homes can be can hold different meanings to different beings, and yeah, in many ways, your research is adding to an underexplored option without disregarding the other researches which already do exist, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. Are there any other questions regarding PhD in general or Simi's research? Um, please raise your hand.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's about it. Thank you so much, Simi. I thoroughly enjoyed having this candid conversation with you, a fellow researcher, fellow Muslim women. And I think most of us in the audience, they had a great time too. So Jazakallah khair for joining in. I'm not able to see you very well. Are you able to hear me?
There is a slight, yeah, I can hear you, but I think there is a slight trouble with the internet connection. I can hear you.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. So let's wrap up this session. Jazakallah khair QIC for collaborating with us. You guys are doing an amazing job. Jazakallah khair Simi. Like we always hear, someone has done a PhD, but we never hear what was the process they went through, what were the challenges, what all did they learn. So thank you for filling in this gap. I loved this candid conversation, and hoping to see you again very soon, inshallah. Let's wrap this session up. So Muslim Women Study Circle, every Sunday we meet. We are a Muslim women collective, and we meet, we call scholars, and we talk to them. That's what we do. And we talk not just about Dini halkas, religion, but we also talk about life and politics and art and everything else. So please do follow us on Insta, and the recording of the session will also be uploaded on YouTube. So please follow us there as well. Jazakallah khair. Wrapping this session up. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.